The OECD has warned that Trump's tariff policies have put the world on a path of slower economic growth and possibly higher inflation. And they called out Canada with an estimate that growth will slow to 0.7% this year and next. I mean, that's pretty close to zero, well below the previous 2% forecast. Let's bring in Alvaro Pereira, chief economist at the OECD. And it's great to have you here, not least because of your Canadian connection. I see that you were a prof at Simon Fraser University and a lecturer at the University of British Columbia, and that you are a Portuguese and Canadian citizen. So thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great being here.
Before we look closely at Canada, just give us the big picture. Really, could this trade war push the globe towards stagflation, higher inflation, and slower growth?
Well, what we argued was that in the past few months, there's been a significant increase in economic policy uncertainty and trade policy uncertainty as well. And this is having already an impact on activity indicators that are coming down in several countries, including Canada, the United States, and South Africa, but also on consumer sentiment, which has decreased quite significantly in countries like Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Brazil. And so as a consequence, taking into account the impact that the tariffs will have on the world economy, we've downgraded almost every single G20 country. And the global growth will be, instead of being 3.3%, this year will be 3.1%, and next year 3%. So assuming that all these tariffs will stay, the impact will be quite significant.
The economists, of course, traditionally would say, well, free trade is good. But I suppose you can understand people looking at the demolition of the North American manufacturing sector by China. I know the Chinese can make things better, manufacture things more efficiently, and that's in theory good for everyone. But I think it's understandable, isn't it, when we see our Rust Belt, for example, around the Great Lakes in North America hollowed out, that people would question that.
Well, as I said, going back to what I was saying regarding the forecast, the consequence of all this rising protectionism is going to be a downgrade in growth and a bit more inflation. So the question is exactly, is this short-term pain worth it for the long-term gain? Well, we think that it's very important to first of all improve the business environment in many countries and try to have the incentives to bring back manufacturing, no doubt about it. We think this is absolutely essential for Canada and for the United States and other countries. For Canada, for example, we're saying that Canadian productivity has been lower than many other G7 and G20 countries, and decreasing barriers, internal barriers to trade, improving the business environment, cutting down regulations is going to be quite important to bring to boost growth in Canada. With regards to China, we know that there's been questions whether there's a level playing field regarding trade, but we think that the most important thing is going forward is that if there's not a level playing field, how can we improve this level playing field? In particular, how can we keep markets open and making sure that the level playing field exists? And for that, dialogue is absolutely essential. And we hope that after all this uncertainty, we are able to get a situation which keep markets open, and there's a deal that will allow us to have a lower tariff rate. In fact, we estimate what could happen to the world if everybody decreases their average effective tariff rate by 1.5%, which is small, but the impact is quite significant. So we still think that it pays off to lower barriers as long as the level playing field exists, and as long as certain areas that, like you said, the Rust Belt, that were disproportionately affected, are given the chance of reviving and rebuilding. We think this is quite important. Bringing back manufacturing is quite important.
Can we zero in on Canada, where you did spend quite a while? You have special insight into the Canadian economy. You're bringing down the growth estimate for Canada to almost nothing growth estimate for this year and next. Is that partly because we're so exposed to U.S. trade?
Yes, exactly. So basically 74% at least of Canadian exports go to the United States. And so tariffs have a disproportionate impact on Canada same thing with Mexico, vis-a-vis other countries. And what we're forecasting is, it was a difficult forecast because we don't know exactly what are the end game regarding tariffs. But if you take into account the 25% tariffs against Canada and the United States, against Canada and Mexico, for the next couple of years, the impact will be quite significant, where growth will be 0.7% this year and the next in Canada. But however, if you take into account only the non-US CME tariffs, so that means the current ones, then Canadian growth will be 1.3%. But of course, the third best solution would be if there's the tariffs rather than existing with if there's a deal, then growth in Canada will be much stronger. What I think is important is that at this stage, that some of the reforms, especially on internal barriers to trade in Canada, have been discussed among economists and among people for a long time. And this shock, we think, is a good opportunity to do the reforms that Canada has been due to do for many, many years. And we hope that from now onwards, provinces and the federal government get together and are able to do this type of reforms.
Do you think our sluggish growth in productivity, and I know it's not unique to Canada, is possibly a cultural problem? And this is a very hard thing to assess, but that just the spirit of entrepreneurship in Canada hasn't, for some reason, been suppressed, or we've lost it?
Well, it's true that in the last 3 decades, productivity has come down in virtually every single country, at least the advanced countries. However, in Canada, this decline in productivity was higher than it happened in other countries, in particular vis-a-vis the United States. I don't think it is a cultural issue. I think it has come down to incentives. What it means is, what type of incentives can Canada provide so that we have a vibrant business climate? What can we do to promote entrepreneurship around the country? What can we do so that provinces and people from around different provinces cooperate more and going forward? Or, for example, in terms of infrastructure, I'll give an example. In terms of electrical infrastructure, the grids, they're not totally connected across provinces. And so we do not have in Canada a single market that could be of 40 million people, that could be a very powerful force for us to have stronger growth. So I don't think low productivity in Canada has to do with culture. It has to do mostly with the need to do reforms, and it comes down to basic economic incentives.
You served as a cabinet minister in Portugal. Your books include The Myths of the Portuguese Economy. Just give us an update on Portugal. In many ways, of course, it's had an economic renaissance this century. But how is Portugal doing right now?
Portugal is doing okay. It's growing not much, but it's growing at 2%. It certainly had improved before the time that I was in government. Growth was for about 20 years was less than 1%. Now it's growing at 2%. Still low for a country like Portugal. Should be growing 3 or 4. But at least it's a proof that reforms pay off. If you invest in labor market reforms, product market reforms, pro-competition reforms, if you invest in single market and in promoted entrepreneurship, this pays off because it creates a lot more jobs, creates opportunities, and people and firms will respond. And so that's why I think, with the analogy to Canada, it's so important to go back to reform and be able to go ahead with some reforms that have been postponed for a long time in this country.
And certainly, I know it has a reputation for affordable living costs, excellent health care, and a low crime rate. And so those things count for a lot. But it's hard to generalize about a country. Really appreciate your joining us. Thank you very much indeed, Alvaro.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Alvaro Pereira, Chief